Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week 3 of management. So by now, you've watched the first 2 weeks of the videos, I hope. I will take a moment and acknowledge I tried to cut my own hair. It could have been worse, but it could have been better. Nonetheless, it happened. And I shaved my beard because then I looked silly. And now I look silly too. My friend told me I look like a tomato that can talk, which I guess could be worse. Tomatoes are fruits and vegetables. So right now, you should have watched the first 2 weeks of management. You should have done the first management quiz, and you should have either attended or watched the videos for the first management tutorial, in which case you also know that our coursework has changed. In the past, when this was a face-to-face class, I always asked students to interview a real-life manager and ask them some questions about what we've learned in this class and that kind of thing. But the problem is, because this is an online course, I really need to make sure you're learning what you need to learn. And it's not just for this course. This is Management 100. You know, the other classes that you take in university, whether it's organizational behavior or human resource management or supply chain management or brand management, I mean, so much of this stuff stems from management. If you're not paying attention, you're not getting it, you're not understanding, I need to know that as the teacher. And so because we're not in class together, I can't just ask you questions and understand if you know the subject. So therefore, I really think it's important that we make sure that you're able to answer both these quiz questions and that the coursework is a more traditional question and answer format. Because really, this class is much more important than just passing this class. It's really foundational stuff. So in the first week, we talked about the beginnings of what is a manager, what does a manager do, where does a manager work, some ideas of management science from Fail and Mintzberg and Katz, things like that, challenges facing managers. Then in the second week, we talked more about management theories. So we talked about really early management prior to the 1600s or 1700s, then classical management, particularly focusing on F.W. Taylor and his one best way to manage, which involves standardization and simplification. And that gave us the whole classical school of management, the rational technical approach to management, which included the Gilbreths and included Max Weber. Then we talked about early developments into more organizational theories of management, which involved understanding that the person, the worker, is not a tool or a part of a machine, but is an independent, free-thinking person. And that, that a good manager needs to take this into account. And so we talked about how those early developments in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, how those led to the Hawthorne experiments in the 1940s, and how that really led us to human relations management in the 1960s. Then we talked about, we also talked about TQM, total quality management, and then we talked about systems theory and contingency theory. And now this week, we're going to talk more about decision making. So this is, or was, chapter 7 in the book. I have now updated the syllabus and put that on Blackboard too, so if you want or can read ahead in the PDF book, feel free to do so. As I said early on, everything on the midterm, the final, is in the textbook. So you can also study my PPTs, but everything there is in the textbook. So just feel free to read that. So today, we'll talk about this 8-step process. Then we'll talk about 4 ways managers make decisions. We'll talk about different decision-making styles. We'll just talk about biases. And we'll talk about how to be effective. So those are the big ideas in this week's lesson. So first of all is the idea of what does it mean to make a decision, right? You make decisions, and so do I every day. I chose to cut my own hair. You know, I think it looks better on video than it does in real life, because in real life, I think it looks silly, but I don't know. I chose to put these clothes on. I chose to be drinking water right now. I chose to buy these headphones. I chose to go outside earlier today and go for a walk. You choose what you eat for breakfast. You choose what university you go to. You choose what you wear. You choose who you call on the phone. We are all decision makers. Now, managers need to be effective decision makers because they're making decisions that affect both a company or a business and other people, such as the employees. So how do you make a good decision? What does it mean to have a good decision? Was me cutting my hair a good decision? Was my taking a walk earlier a good decision? What'd you have for breakfast, and was that a good decision? We need to understand this is not an exact word. It's a term of art. Good is really the opposite of bad. Good by itself doesn't necessarily have a meaning. A good decision could be a decision that benefits you, or it could be a decision that benefits others, or it could be a decision that benefits the business. These could, if there was a choice you could make as a manager and it would benefit the business, but it would not benefit you personally, is that a good decision? Many people, the CEO certainly would say yes, that you should think about the business before yourself. If there's a decision that could benefit you and your family but would hurt the business, is that a good decision? Well, your family might say yes, but the CEO might say no. So we don't have a clear definition of what good is. Well, what about rational and logical? Are these good decisions? Is it good to be rational? What does it mean to be rational or logical? It means to think about cause and effect. If I do this, this will happen. And if I do this, this will happen. So is that enough? It gets us into an interesting case that we talk more about in organizational behavior, which was the case of Phineas Gage, who was a railroad worker in the 1800s. And he was constructing some railroad tracks, and there was an explosion, and a piece of metal, a bar of metal, actually went through his head and out the other side. And in fact, he was okay. He survived. At the hospital, they were able to take out the metal, but it did damage a piece of his brain. And it turns out it was the piece of the brain that had feelings. And so after that, Phineas Gage was 100% rational, logical, nothing else, pure logic. And people thought, scientists thought, well, we'll see what happens now when somebody is pure 100% logic. Maybe he'll go on and become a millionaire or something. Well, what really happened is he had a complete inability to live in society. He immediately left his wife. Why would you give money to this other person? Why would you help? He walked away from his children. I mean, why would you buy food and give it to these children? It doesn't help you. And so he walked away from that. He couldn't hold down a job. He couldn't have any social relationships. He ended up joining a circus and just traveling with the circus to show everybody the hole in his head because he couldn't do anything. Because in fact, logic and rationality are not enough. But we get into that much more when we talk about sociology. One example of rational thinking was this very, very famous case from the Ford Motor Company called Grimshaw versus Ford Motor. And I'm a lawyer, so I like to talk about the law, but this is a very important case, actually. It's the case of the Ford Pinto, if you've ever heard of that car. It was, I want to say a tragedy, although it was, but a very important case in American history about what it means to just be purely logical. So in this case, it was 1972, and this woman, Lily, she's driving a Ford Pinto, and she has a 13-year-old passenger, Richard Grimshaw. So the car is rear-ended. Now, here's the thing you need to know about the Pinto. Generally, cars, in the back of the car, there's the trunk, and in the trunk is space where you could put your suitcase or whatever. And when you put gas in the car, that's on the side of the car, and you open up the little panel and you put in the gas on the side of the car. Well, the Ford Motor Company in the 1970s decided to change that. They decided to put the gas in the back of the car because there's a much larger space, so you could have more gas, a bigger gas tank. And they decided to put the storage space for suitcases and stuff on the side. That's what they did. Now, this was interesting and people liked it, except when the car was rear-ended, which means one car, boom, hit the other car in the back. Remember, the gas is back there. It exploded more often than not. The car exploded and people were injured. Now, the Ford Motor Company has a tremendous amount of money. They've been around a long time. They have a lot of money. And so they did a study, a very, very basic cost-benefit analysis. Does it cost us more, they asked, for the Ford Motor Company, does it cost us more to fix all these cars, to recall all the cars and fix them, or every time someone gets burned or killed to pay their family? Which costs more? And they found it would cost more to fix the cars than to pay for the families that are injured. So this car stalls, it's rear-ended, it's hit in the rear. The fuel tank of the Pinto ruptures, leaks fuel, ignites, and it kills Lily and severely burns Richard. Richard has to have over 90 surgeries, and the family sue the Ford Motor Company. So in 1978, a judgment was given against Ford. Ford loses, and the family gets $560,000 and $2.5 million in compensatory damages. But that wasn't the real part of the case. I mean, that's a lot of money in 1970s. You know, it's a lot of money now, but in the 1970s or late 70s, that was a tremendous amount of money. And you can look at what we're saying here. So the Gray family, that's Lily Gray, she died. So this is the amount of money her life was worth. Now the Grimshaw family, that was this 13-year-old boy, he got a lot more, even though he lived. That's an interesting thing in the law. But so he got a lot more. Why? Because it was compensatory damages, pain and suffering. So he had to have 90 surgeries. He was burned over most of his body. He was going to live, but he would have pain and suffering for his whole life. So they gave more. But here's the key part, was this thing that came out called the Pinto Memo. During this case, the Ford Motor Company had to give some of their documents to the court. And one of them was this memo written by the Ford Motor Company, by their accountants, this showing this cost-benefit analysis. And when the jury saw this, the jury is these 12 people who listened to the case, when the 12 people saw that the Ford Motor Company was just judging human life by cost-benefit, the jury got very, very upset, and they awarded $125 million in punitive damages. Punitive means to punish. So $125 million, that's a big amount of money. Now later, the judge reduced that to $3.5 million. But the reason that it was such a big number was this Pinto Memo. It was a short document, and it was just a very basic cost-benefit analysis. The cost of fixing the car was $11 per car, to add a little piece of rubber or shock in the back so that if it got hit, it wouldn't explode. That was really all it was, or to stop the fuel canister from rupturing. Ford valued human life at $200,000 per life and burns at $67,000. Now, here's the thing is the public didn't know that all companies do this. I mean, Ford got caught doing it, but all companies do this. This basic cost-benefit analysis about the value of human life and whether it's worth it for them to be more careful, or should they just pay when someone gets injured by their product. But Ford got caught doing this. And this is the idea of that we can't just use logic or rationality. That's what Ford did. They just used simple logic. And if logic had no problem, then everybody would say, oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, you just did a cost-benefit analysis. It costs you more to fix the car than to pay for human life. So, you know, you let people die, sure. You know, there's quite a few interesting cases like this in the law where rationality only works until the public finds out. And then the public gets upset. So this idea of decision-making, balancing rationality versus emotion, intuition, all of these things, it's a skill. And like any good skill, it can be learned and it can be improved. So some people may say, oh, I make bad decisions. That doesn't mean you always will make bad decisions. So decision making, let's start with the definition. What does it mean? It's a choice of two or more alternatives. It's not a decision unless you have a choice, 2 or more alternatives. And there are generally 4 steps, and we're going to learn this. So first, and this is a little tricky because the first one is an 8-step process. That's the first part. The first part is to do this 8-step process. Second is to figure out, do I want to be rational or intuitive? Third is to understand our style. And then fourth is to understand our biases. So those are really the 4, maybe step is the wrong word, but the 4 factors or the 4 procedures in making a good decision. So we're going to start with the 8-step process. And I am going to ask you for homework this week. What I want to see is, rather than just give you a quiz, although maybe I'll do that too, but rather than give you a quiz, what I intend is I want you to do this 8-step process, to choose something, make a decision. Now, the decision could be anything, as you'll see in a minute when we start talking about it. It could be that I want to buy a new phone and I don't know what to buy. I want to join a yoga studio. I want to lose 10 pounds and I don't know how. I want to buy some new clothes and I don't know what store to go to. I want to drink more coffee and I don't know what the best what coffee shop I should go to. It really doesn't matter. I'm not talking about a business decision at all. We're going to practice this by just making a life decision. So here's this first part, is the 8-step process. So first I'm going to ask you to identify a problem. And that's what I just said. I want to buy a new phone. I don't know which to buy. I want to take a yoga class. I don't know which school to go to. I want to travel this summer, assuming we can all travel this summer. I don't know where to go to. I can't decide if I should go to the beach or I should go to hiking in the mountains with my friends. I want to go on a diet, and there's lots of diet websites, and I don't know which one I should use. I want to start exercising more. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Whatever the problem is, that's the first step. The second step is going to be this keyword criteria. So these 8 steps, this is your homework. This is what I expect for homework. So first, identify a problem. Don't care what it is. I'm looking for an internship. I'm looking for a job, whatever the problem is. Now, the criteria. Let's say that you're talking about looking for a job, for example. Okay, let's take that. Now, if my problem is I want to find a job or an internship or whatever this summer, the next thing is to figure out my criteria. Criteria are the factors that are important to you. So let's say, what factors are important to you in looking for a job? Well, maybe one factor is money. I'm not going to be able to draw this nicely, but let's say one factor is money. Okay, I'll just say money. And one factor is location. And one factor is the environment. What kind of environment is it? And one factor is, if you're looking for a job, what money, location, environment. Let's say I'll say field. The kind of job it is. Would you take any job that made a lot of money? What if you found a wonderful job that's very close to you, makes a lot of money, selling cigarettes to children? Would you do it? I mean, I'm not judging you. I don't care. I'm just saying that matters to some people and it doesn't matter to other people. So the field might matter. What else? Let's give money, location, environment, field. Okay, well, let's stick with those. I expect you to get at least 8 criteria, probably. If you're looking for a phone, what is your criteria? How much money it is, battery life, camera quality, the screen, how long it lasts, is it easy to repair, is there a customer warranty, is it Apple, or what's the operating system? There's lots of, if you're talking about buying headphones, price, quality, company, brand, size, inside the ear or outside the ear. I mean, sure, there's any list of criteria, that's what we're talking about. Because we can't make a good decision. A lot of people try to make decisions without even writing down what is important to them in this choice. Then we need weights. Now, this is the key part. This is really what makes it, step 3 is what makes this scientific as much as we can. So, and we'll see an example of this in a minute. Don't worry, we'll go through another example of this again. But the weights, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is money to me on a scale of 1 to 10? Let's say to me it's an 8. It's not like the most, I wouldn't sell cigarettes to children. That would be like a 10. If it's a 10, then you do absolutely anything for the money. But there are things I would not do for the money. I wouldn't cheat people. I wouldn't lie. I wouldn't steal. I mean, if you told me your job is to go and copy someone else's, whatever, and, I don't want to do that. But money is important. Location. For me, location is quite important too. I don't like to travel too far. I'll give that a 7. What about the environment? I'm pretty flexible on the environment. I'll give that a 6. And the field is actually very important to me. What I do, I'll give that a maybe a 9. It's really important to me, actually. Okay, so now I have my weights. I know how heavy or how important each of these factors, these criteria, are to me. Now I need some alternatives. So what are my job possibilities? And here I'm going to list my possibilities. So let's say one possibility is this summer I could teach English. That's a possibility. 2, I could work at a construction site. 3, obviously I could be a professional hair cutter. 4, I could, well, let's stick with those 3. I expect that you'll find more. If you're looking for a cell phone, it might be like Apple, Huawei, Xiaomi, Google phone. I don't even know what other phones there are, but there's tons. Nokia, whatever. So you're going to have a list of your choices, your alternatives. If you're talking about going to gyms, it would be whatever gyms are close to you, or yoga studios. If you're talking about going on vacation, it might be, going to the beach, going to the mountains, going to Europe, whatever your choices are. Weights and criteria, these are not choices, right? Money is not a choice. Location is not a choice. Every job is going to have some kind of location or environment or field. It's just, to me, these are the criteria that I consider. When I consider this problem, I should be thinking about these criteria. And then how important is each criterion? Then what are my alternatives? Now I'm going to analyze the alternatives. So in terms of money, and so what I'd end up doing is, and I'm going to have you do this for homework, is to make sort of a, that's a terrible picture, to make a chart. And maybe I can draw this somewhere else more nicely. But to make a chart, how do I keep angling up? And the chart is going to have like these lines, right? And each one of these is a possible alternative. And then it's also going to have these columns. And each column is a criteria. So if my chart looked like this, on the top over here, I would have my criterion, right? I'd have money, I'd have location, I'd have environment, I'd have fields. And then on the left side, I'd have the alternatives. Being a hair cutter, being an English teacher, working construction, being a professional model, I think is obvious that I could do that. Actor, maybe. Comedian, right? Okay, anyway, so those are my choices. Now, what I want to do is I want to analyze these. So if, like, one choice for a job is English teacher. Now, for English teacher, how's the money? 1 to 10. Not talking about how important is it to me, just talking about my opinion. How much money does an English teacher make, 1 to 10? Let's say 6. Maybe even 7 in China, but 6, let's say. What about location? Well, location for English teaching, I could just meet them at Starbucks. That's pretty easy, or whatever. So let's say location is an 7. What about E was environment? Well, I might have to work with little kids. I don't really want to. Because I could teach little kids or adults. With little kids, I don't really want that environment. I'd give that a 4. because I don't really want that. It's clean. It's got a bathroom. It's okay. It's not like working in a terrible environment, but I don't want it. So I'll give it a 4. And then for the field teaching kids, well, not actually, I don't mind the field. I'll give that an 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the, let's say I said the money for being an English teacher was about a 6. 6 times 8 is 48. The location, so you see what I'm doing is, so for English teacher, I wish I had a way to draw a bigger example of this, but you know, for if I'm talking about being an English teacher versus being a construction worker versus being a hair cutter, for each of these, whatever the money is, you know, the M, whatever that number is, I multiply it by 8. For the location, whatever, how good the location is for each of these jobs, I multiply them all by 7. And I hope that's a little bit clear. Let's look at another example, see if I can make that a little more clear. And as I said, your homework is to use these 8 steps to make a decision. Choose a problem. I don't care if it's which headphones to buy or how to sell your product or how to make new friends or which yoga class, and then apply these steps, and then we'll talk about it. And I will ask you to submit it to me as your quiz. So, step 1, identify the problem. Now, we're going to use an example where Amanda is a sales manager for a company and she needs new laptops. That's the example they use in the book. So now, we already know a little bit about this. So first of all, if you're buying a laptop, what's some of your criteria? What matters when you're buying a laptop? Let's say how expensive it is, the battery life, the screen quality, the camera, how heavy it is it easy to fix, how good is the warranty, is it a brand name? What else matters in a laptop? Storage capacity, I don't know if I said that. Maybe graphics card might matter to some people. Is it a desktop or not desktop? Is it a, what do you call it? Like an Apple or a, what's the other one? PC. That's it. So these are some of our criteria. Now in the book, they said, you can read this on your own, but this is just talking about how do you know if it's really a problem? It's something that's actual. You need to be under some kind of pressure. You have to have authority. You can read that on your own. So the step 2 is identifying this criteria. This is what I want you to know. And so for Amanda, she decides memory, storage, display quality, battery, warranty, and weight. She decides these are going to be the most important criteria for her. And the third step, we're going to allocate weights, right? So how important are each of these things to Amanda? Is battery life the most important? Would she give that a 10 out of 10? Or is the display quality the most important? Would she give that a 9 out of 10? What about if the warranty doesn't matter? She gives that a 1 out of 10. We need to know how important these criteria are to you. And so we get this. This is her criteria weight. So to Amanda, memory and storage is definitely the most important, where display quality is the least important. And all of these different numbers represent how important the criteria are to her. Next step is to develop alternatives. So she found 8 different possible laptops that she could use, right? So here are the laptops she identified as possibilities. We have HP, Sony, Lenovo, Apple, Toshiba, Dell, right? There's a bunch of them. And now we're talking here not about the criterion, but just about the actual computers. So in terms of memory, you see they're not organized like lowest to highest or highest to lowest. 10, 7, 7, but then 6, or then 8 goes back up, or 10, then 8, then 7, then 10 again. So it's not highest to lowest. It's just, if you look at the first one, the HP ProBook, how's the memory on that? Now, how do you find this out? If you're trying to make all decisions, how would I find out which job to get? I just have to go online, look at their website, maybe even call them, talk to people. If I want to know which headphones to buy, you go on the Google, you find out, like, how's the memory, how's the storage, how's the battery life, is it heavy, what's the warranty like? You can find most of this information online. If you're talking about which yoga class to go to, you might call them, you might go and visit. So for the HP ProBook, it has good memory, it has terrible battery life, very heavy, or maybe that means it's the best. I don't know. Maybe that's the best. You know, good warranty, medium display quality. What about something like Dell? I like Dell. Excellent memory, pretty good battery, pretty good carrying weight, okay warranty, and pretty good. So Dell looks okay. So, you know, what you could do here is you could add up all of these numbers, right? That's what you could do. And that's what most people would do. They would think, oh, this is very scientific. I'm adding up all the numbers. But here's the problem. That doesn't say which computer is the best for you. That just says which computer is the best. So if you just add up the numbers, you know, it looks like maybe the Lenovo IdeaPad is the best for you because it has the highest number. But if we don't think about our criteria, I might have something like a choice like the Lenovo that has a really good warranty and a really good display quality. Guess what? I don't care about the warranty or the display quality. For me, I rank those warranty to me out of 10 is 2. And display quality, I don't care about at all because I don't do videos. I don't use my computer to watch TV really. So I give that a 2. So out of 10, these things don't really matter to me. So even though they have the highest score because they have 10s here, you know, what about the carrying weight? Well, what if that's the most important thing to me? And so I choose Lenovo because it's got the highest score. But actually, the carrying weight is really heavy. I maybe wanted an HP because actually this matters to me a lot. You know, so we have to factor in our criteria and their weights. So we analyze the alternative based on looking at the criteria weight. And then we select one. So now here's what we did in this example is we multiplied. So for memory, remember, the criteria to Amanda for memory was a 10. That's what she cared about the most. So you multiply each of these scores by 10. The one she cared about the least, I think, was display quality. Maybe that was a 4. So you multiply each of these things by 4, right? You take your criteria. So essentially it is the criteria multiplied by this. And then the criteria for battery multiplied by the score. The criteria for weight multiplied by the weight. And then you add it up. And then you actually find out it looks like for her, the Dell was the best, right? That was the best. But if you just added up the numbers, she would have made a decision to buy the wrong computer. Now, buying a computer, it might not be the biggest problem in the world, but sometimes when you're making a decision that affects your business or affects potentially hundreds of employees, it can be very, very important to understand not only what are the criteria that we're thinking about, but also how important is each of these criterion to us. So then we implement that, we actually do it, and then finally we evaluate the outcomes. You know, how effectively was the problem resolved? And if the problem was not resolved, why? That's our 8-step process. And the first part of being a managerial decision maker is understanding this 8-step process. Now, managers make all kinds of decisions. We've talked before about FAIL, and FAIL said managers have 4 functions: planning, organizing, leading, controlling. So what kind of decisions do managers make in the planning function? Well, long-term objectives, managers might make a decision about that. How to achieve the objectives, short-term objectives, individual goals, all of that is planning. For organizing, how many employees should you have? Should the organization be very centralized, like you are the manager and you make all of the decisions, or should it be more decentralized where the employees have the power to make decisions themselves? How should the jobs be designed? And we'll talk later in this course about job design. Structure, we'll talk later in this course about structure. Now for leading, what do you do if employees are not motivated? How do you motivate them? What leadership style should you use? We'll talk about all this later in the course. Change management, we'll talk about more in organizational behavior. And what about conflict? What about stimulating conflict? Sometimes conflict is very important. And then control. What activities need to be controlled? How do you control them? When is a deviation significant? And what do we mean by that? Again, we've talked about this, briefly, but control means not telling people what to do, but setting benchmarks. So with control, it's the process of creating a standard and then measuring your business to see, is it above that standard? Is it below? So what's a good standard for how many shirts we should sell? 50 a month, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 6? I mean, who knows? We need a standard based on looking at other companies, looking at what they do, and then we decide, okay, 100 a month is a good standard. Now we measure our progress. Are we selling 200? Are we selling 10? And is this deviation, this difference, significant? If a good standard is 100 and we're selling 95, maybe it's not a significant deviation. Okay, so that's the first part of decision making. The second part has to do with, are we going to be rational or are we going to be intuitive? And both of these are important. So the thing is, most people assume that a manager is being rational, when in fact that's, often not the truth. Often a manager doesn't study management. Most managers didn't go to school and study management, so they just worked in a company and worked their way up and now they're managers, which means a lot of managers really don't know how to do sort of this scientific decision-making process. We assume that the manager is being logical and rational. It's not really always true, because for us, when we say rational, we mean consistent while maximizing value. So consistent decisions, that if a manager made a decision this way on Monday, they'll make the same kind of decision on Wednesday or Friday or next week or next month. If the factors are all like this, the manager will always decide like that. But people just aren't consistent. And that the manager will always look at maximizing value. But it's not true, because a lot of times people are not rational. And we have these assumptions about managers that we need to consider before we decide, when we make a decision, are we really being rational? We assume that a manager is fully objective, that a manager never takes anything personally. But managers do. Managers do have friends. They have workers who they're closer friends with and others who are not in their friend group. We have decisions that managers, they really want this decision to work, even though it doesn't look like it's in the best interest of the company. Managers are not always objective. We assume that the problem will be clear and unambiguous, that the problem will be like, which laptop should we buy? Well, that's a clear problem. Problems often aren't that clear. The problem could be, why aren't we selling enough? How do we sell more? How do we get more customers? People have recently said our product isn't good. Why? These are not clear, unambiguous problems. We assume that the manager knows all possible alternatives and the consequences, but often the manager has very limited information as well. The manager doesn't know what is the right choice here, or even what the options are. If it seems like nobody really knows our product, and we tell the manager, okay, we need to spend some money on advertising. What kind of advertising campaign should we do? You assume that the manager has any clue or even knows the possible options. But that's not always true. We just assume it. And second, and lastly, that the manager is always trying to maximize achieving that goal, which is often not true. Often the managers are trying to look good. It's not about the goal at all. It's not about the company. It's not about the profits. It's about the manager being afraid of looking bad or getting fired or getting in trouble. So we have to understand that when we think managers are being rational, often they're not really being rational. These are assumptions that we make. Now, if the manager has a simple problem where the goals are clear, time pressure is minimal, the cost to look for these options is low. Like if the manager wants to think of an advertising campaign, how much money does it take and how long does it take to consider all your options? If you don't know much about advertising, it might take you a month That's going to cost you money and time. You might have to interview different advertising firms. Maybe you have to pay a retainer to some firms or a deposit, or I mean, it could be a lot of money to try to figure out which advertising campaign you should use. We assume that the culture supports innovation and risk taking, but lots of cultures do not. In fact, I would, argue that most cultures do not support innovation and risk taking, no matter what they say. Even if they say, oh, we love our employees to take risks. No, they don't. Taking risks means possibly losing money. And also that the outcomes are measurable. If we're going to buy a laptop, okay, we can measure, did we get the laptop? How heavy is it? How long does the battery last? We can measure all that stuff. But what if it's about an advertising campaign? How would you possibly know if you would have gotten more customers if you went with this advertising firm and did it all on the internet? Or you would have gotten more customers if you went with that advertising firm and did it all on, print magazines? It's hard to know. So we assume if these things are all true, then we can be rational. This is the only time that a manager can truly be rational. If anybody asks me as a manager, David, is that a rational decision? I would have to say, listen, I can only be rational if the problem is clear, there isn't much time pressure, it's almost free to evaluate the alternatives, I'm allowed to take risks, and I can easily measure the results. Other than that, I can't always be rational. Instead, we are bounded. We're not completely, the managers in the world are not completely rational. They have a boundary for how rational they can be. Well, what sets this boundary? Well, part of it is satisfice. I have said I've worked in the entertainment industry in China. I've worked on TV shows. I was the creative director of a big show for the Shanghai Media Group. I've worked with Alibaba. I've worked with Tencent. I've worked with Sohu. I've worked with Kaixin Mahua. I've worked with some of the big names in China and in their entertainment. And a lot of times they will end up putting on a show that's terrible, really just bad, because of satisfice. And that means accepting a solution that's just good enough. You see it all the time in China with a sign that might have the English is a little bit wrong, and they think, yeah, I know, we're a big bank, we're Bank of China, and the English is spelled wrong, but it's good enough. That is called satisfice. And it means just accept sometimes as a manager, you just can't have everything perfect. It's going to cost you too much money, too much time. There are other things that are more critical. And so you just have to accept satisfice. Another thing that kind of is a boundary for our ability to be rational is called escalation of commitment. And what that means is, another way to say this is throwing good money after bad. If you've ever heard that expression in English, throwing good money after bad. Let's say I have a company and I'm the manager and I want to put some money into advertising. Okay, I like our product. I think it's good, but we need more advertising. And I have this idea. I think we should use all Twitter advertising. And people say, well, David, your product, it's a company in China. Chinese people can't use Twitter. And I say, I know, but I know a lot of Chinese people do use a VPN. I believe they can use Twitter. I want to focus on that. And so I put in $10,000 to a Twitter campaign. And we don't get good results. Okay? Now, that was bad money. That was a bad choice. Now, I have another $10,000 in my advertising budget. I only spent half so far. I could throw that good money after the bad money and put it into Twitter. That would be an escalation of commitment. What if people said to me, David, Twitter was a bad idea. You already spent $10,000. Now you have another 10. What are you going to do? And I say, no, I refuse to accept that I was wrong. I was right. You'll see that I was right. What we needed was just more Twitter. We had a small sort of window. We need to hit every Twitter page. I'm going to go to the bank and borrow $30,000 and make this a $50,000 Twitter campaign, right? Now, I have evidence that my decision to put it on Twitter may have been wrong. because I put in $10,000, I didn't get good results, but because I want to be right. Why do I want to be right? Because I'm the manager. I want to be right because I'm the manager and you should listen to me. And so I might not listen to logic. And instead, this is a boundary of my logic. I can't be rational because I'm guided by my need to, have face and to be right. So I made a commitment a little bit, I put 10,000 into Twitter, and now I'm going to escalate my commitment. That stops us from being rational. Intuition. Intuition is something that is a boundary, right? This is making decisions based on experience, feelings, accumulated judgment. So what do we mean accumulated? Well, let's say that you tell me that Shanghai is very safe and you can walk around at night, and at night it's dark, it doesn't matter, it's very safe. And I say, okay, cool. But, I've lived in China for a while and I have seen some fights and, especially near clubs, and people get drunk, and, there is crime. And so I'm walking down the street one night, and I'm at the street, and there's two ways I could go. And I look to the right and I look to the left, and something about the left is wrong. I can't tell you what it is, but it just feels wrong. Even though that's the way that would get me home quicker, I just don't trust it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to trust my heart. I'm not going to go. I go right. Now, what was that? So in fact, we call that thin slicing. What happened is your brain took in a ton of information and made a very thin slice. Now, that information could have to do with your experience, that somewhere in your brain you read something on WeChat years ago or months ago that said there was a little bit more crime in this area of the city, and you've forgotten that, but not subconsciously. Subconsciously, you remember that. It could be that there's something about the shadows that your brain can't really tell what it is, but we have that peripheral memory, right? And the same way, this goes back to our, our limbic system, like the reptile brain. So if let's say you're sitting here right now watching this video, and all of a sudden something crawls on the other side of the room really fast, moves fast. Now, for a lot of people, they're going to jump and then look, right? If you see like something move very fast on the other side of the room, like on the bottom, like it could be, a bug or a spider or a roach or maybe even a rat or a mouse, most people do not calmly turn and then, oh my God. No, not at all, right? Most people are like, oh God. They jump and then they look to see what it was. And then they're like, oh my God, it's just a piece of dirt. The wind blew it and it looked like a spider, because our brains can recognize danger. It's what's kept us humans alive. And when there's some sort of movement that our brains recognize as dangerous, we jump first. And then we look to determine what it is. If there's a snake or spider, or, some creepy, crawly, gross thing, we jump first. Now, if you look down this alley and you see some scary shadows, you may not recognize what your brain is really seeing. But if it's seeing like, oh, it kind of looks like a person or whatever it is, your brain is telling you. That's the accumulation of all of this judgment, and then your brain taking a very thin slice of this judgment. A very interesting book, famous book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. That's all about this idea of thin slicing. Very, very interesting book that maybe we can talk about in the tutorial. But if you get the chance, I highly recommend it. Really easy to read too. And his idea is, a lot of the decisions people make, we think we're being rational, but we're not. He had a great example, and I'm sorry for boring you if you've already read the book, but, right at the beginning where there was a museum called the Paul Getty Museum. It's here in New York. And they had some money to spend. And so they had, millions of dollars to buy a Greek statue. And so they found this Greek statue that was like perfect. It was just amazing, very good condition. Let's say it would cost, $20 million. So of course, first they did a lot of tests on it. They need to make sure it's not a fake. And so they test the quality of the marble, the stone, the age of the marble. They, test the location it came from and all of these different tests. And they found out 100%. They did $1 million of testing. because this is, a $20 million purchase. So they did $1 million of testing. They found out this is real. It's the real thing. They did one last test. They invited experts in statues, in archaeology, in art history, experts and professors to come from all over the world to see this statue. They put a piece of cloth over it, and they had everybody in the room, and then they took away the covering, and everybody could look at the statue. And all the experts said the same thing. It's fake. And the Paul Getty Museum representative said, well, I mean, it's not fake. We've done all these tests. And the experts said, listen, I don't care what your tests say. It's fake. And they said, well, how do you know it's fake? And the expert said, I don't know how I know. I know. I've done this for 50 years. It's fake. I know how. I don't know how I know, but I know. And it turns out they were right. It was, no, they didn't do $1 million in testing. The fake cost $1 million to make. That's what it was. It was a very expensive fake, but it was a fake. They were right. And there is no reason. They never came up with one single solution as to why it was clearly fake. It was just fake. One of the experts said, in 50 years of experience, I can tell you that statue was not buried under the ground. It just wasn't. It's just something about it. It's too right. It's got to be a little more wrong. So all this stuff is what's called intuition. It could come from our experiences, that for 50 years I've done this, or for 10 years I've done this. It could come from our values or our ethics, that something looks like a good decision, but it's like, no, that goes against my values. It could come from this thin slicing, your subconscious mental processing. It could come from your cognition, what you're actually thinking about. Or it could come from affect. Affect means feelings, right? That sometimes you go into a coffee shop and you're looking for the perfect coffee shop to use for, you want to have shows or you want to have a poetry night. And so you can find the perfect coffee shop, and they have the good customers, a good location, the price of the coffee is good, but you walk in and it just feels wrong. That's intuition. It just feels wrong. All of these things together are what we call intuition. So what we want more than anything is EBM, evidence-based management. We want our management to be as scientific as possible. And generally, when we say scientific, what we mean is we want numbers. We want everything to be quantifiable. So in this decision-making process, we don't just want to say, well, I think Apple phones are good. We should get Apple. Or I think I've always wanted to teach adults. I should just do that. It's like, what's your criteria? What's your weighting? We really want it to be as scientific as possible. So for evidence-based management, we're looking for expertise. We're looking for judgment. We're looking for evidence. We're looking for people who have a stake in the decision. We don't want the opinions or preferences or values of people who are not in this decision. And then context, circumstance. I'm not going to ask you the elements of EBM. I want you to know what EBM is, evidence-based management, because we talk about that not only in this class, but in HR and in OB, organizational behavior. You'll talk about evidence in brand management, in supply chain management, throughout your business education. The question of what evidence do you have for this decision is an important question. Okay, so that is the first two big things I want to talk about. And the first one is the 8 steps, and the second one is rational versus intuitive. Okay, now we get to the second half of the course, but I think I'd like to take a break here. So this will be 2 videos and finish it up in the next video. So I will see you soon.